The silence of the Wyoming high country is not simply an absence of noise. It is a physical weight, a heavy velvet blanket that smothers the world in white. For Elara Vance, silence was something to be filled. It was an inefficiency, a void where problems could fester if they weren't drowned out by the constant hum of her life in Chicago. Elara was an architect of skylines, a woman who measured her worth in steel beams, glass facades, and the terrifyingly tight deadlines that governed her existence. She lived by the calendar on her phone, a digital tyrant that dictated every breath she took. But here, on a winding, treacherous road somewhere in the shadow of the Wind River Range, her phone was dead. The screen was a blank black mirror reflecting her own panic. The storm had descended with a violence that the weather app had not predicted. Or perhaps she had been too busy answering emails to notice the warning. The rental car, a sedan designed for asphalt and city grids, was currently buried up to its axles in a snowdrift that felt less like weather and more like a trap. The wind howled outside, a mournful, hungry sound that rattled the glass of the windows. Elara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning the color of old parchment. The engine had died 10 minutes ago, and with it, the heater. The cold was already seeping through the floorboards, biting at her ankles through her leather boots. She was dressed for a client meeting in Jackson Hole, wearing a tailored wool coat that cost more than some cars, but offered absolutely no protection against 20 degrees below zero. She had taken the shortcut, the scenic route the GPS suggested. It was a mistake, a beautiful, fatal mistake. She closed her eyes, trying to regulate her breathing, trying to structure her panic like a blueprint. The snow was piling up on the windshield, turning the world into a claustrophobic gray box. She wondered how long it would take for someone to find her. She wondered if anyone even knew she was here. The isolation was absolute. It was terrifying. And then, through the roar of the wind, she heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the mechanical whine of an engine or the siren of a rescue vehicle. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding, a crunching of snow, a snort. Elara wiped the condensation from the glass with a trembling hand and peered out into the swirling white void. A shadow emerged from the storm, tall and terrifyingly large. It was a horse, a massive black beast, its coat frosted with ice, pushing through the drifts with the power of a locomotive. And on its back sat a figure that looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself. A man, wrapped in a heavy canvas duster, his face obscured by the brim of a cowboy hat pulled low against the gale. He reined the horse in beside her car, the animal blowing plumes of steam into the frigid air. The man swung down from the saddle, his movements fluid despite the heavy layers. He waded through the snow to her door, the drifts reaching his thighs. He didn't knock, he simply yanked the handle. It was frozen shut. Elara watched, paralyzed, as he braced a gloved hand against the roof and pulled harder. The ice cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and the door groaned open. The wind rushed in instantly, stealing the last of the warmth. The man leaned in, his face finally visible. He had eyes the color of slate, hard and unreadable, and a jawline hidden beneath a dark-trimmed beard. "You plan on freezing to death out here, ma'am? Are you coming with me?" His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together, but there was no malice in it. Just a stark, undeniable practicality. Elara couldn't speak. Her teeth were chattering too hard. Elara fumbled with her seatbelt, her fingers numb and useless. The man sighed, a puff of white air escaping his lips. He reached across her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he clicked the release button. "Come on," he said, and before she could protest, he scooped her out of the car as if she weighed nothing more than a sack of feed. The world tilted, and suddenly she was pressed against the rough wool of his coat. He smelled of wood smoke, wet leather, and horses. It was an earthy, ancient scent that cut through the sterile cold. He carried her to the horse, which stood stoically in the gale. "Hold on to the horn," he instructed, hoisting her up into the saddle. The leather was freezing, but the heat radiating from the animal was a mercy. He swung up behind her, his arms caging her in, grabbing the reins. "Bury your face in your coat," he ordered near her ear. "The wind will burn you if you don't," Elara obeyed, tucking her head down, closing her eyes. The horse lurched forward, and they began to move through the blindness of the storm. Time lost its meaning. There was only the rocking motion of the horse, the howling wind, and the solid, warm presence of the stranger behind her. She didn't know who he was, didn't know where they were going. For a woman who needed to control every variable, this surrender was the most terrifying thing she'd ever experienced. Finally, the wind seemed to break. They had entered the shelter of a dense pine forest. Through the trees, she saw a flicker of orange light. A cabin. It was low and sturdy, built of dark logs, with smoke pouring bravely from a stone chimney. The horse quickened its pace, sensing the barn and the hay that awaited it. They arrived at a small stable first. The man slid off and reached up for her. Elara tried to move her legs, but they were stiff blocks of ice. She fell more than she dismounted, collapsing into his arms. He caught her icily, holding her upright until she found her footing. "Can you walk?" he asked, looking down at her. "I think so," she stammered, her voice shaking. He didn't wait to find out. He guided her toward the cabin, shielding her body with his own against the last gusts of wind. He opened the heavy oak door, and they stepped inside. The heat hit her like a physical blow, a wall of warmth that made her skin tingle painfully. It was sparse, masculine, and incredibly clean. There was a worn leather armchair, a heavy wooden table, and a small kitchen area. No television, no computer, just shelves of books and the crackle of the fire. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the armchair near the hearth. Elara collapsed into it, shaking uncontrollably as her body began to realize it was safe. The man disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a thick wool blanket. He draped it over her, tucking the edges in around her shoulders. "I'm Caleb," he said, finally introducing himself as he moved to stoke the fire. He didn't look at her. His focus was entirely on the flames. "Caleb Thorne. You're lucky I was out checking the fence line. Another hour in that car, and they wouldn't have found you until the spring thaw." "Elara," she managed to whisper, "Elara, Vance, thank you." She watched him. He moved with an economy of motion, efficient and deliberate. He took off his heavy coat and hat, hanging them by the door. Underneath, he wore a flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He looked like the land itself, rugged, unyielding, and enduring. "Phone lines are down," Caleb said, turning to face her. "Power is out too, but the generator's running the well pump so we have water. You're stuck here, Elara. Storm's supposed to last 2 days, maybe 3. 3 days. The words echoed in her mind. She had a presentation on Monday. She had a life. "I can't stay here for 3 days," she blurted out, the city panic rising again. "I have to get to Jackson, my firm." Caleb cut her off with a look. It wasn't angry, but it was final. "Look outside," he said quietly. She looked. The window was a sheet of white. The world had disappeared. "Nature doesn't care about your firm," Caleb said. walk into the small kitchen to fill a kettle. It doesn't care about your schedule. Out here, you move when the weather lets you. Till then, you sit, you survive, and you wait. He set the kettle on a cast-iron stove. Tea or coffee? Coffee, she said. Black. She watched him grind the beans by hand. There was something hypnotic about it. The crunch of the grinder, the smell of fresh coffee filling the room. It was slow. Everything here was slow. And for the first time in 10 years, Elara realized she didn't have anything to do but watch. The first night passed in a blur of exhaustion. Caleb gave her the bed in the loft, a simple mattress covered in heavy quilts, while he slept on the couch downstairs. She thought she wouldn't sleep, that her mind would race with anxieties about the missed meeting. But the silence of the snow was heavy, and the warmth of the cabin was a lullaby. She slept for 12 hours. She woke to the smell of frying bacon. Sunlight was streaming through the small window in the loft, brilliant and blinding. The storm had broken, but the snow was incredibly deep. She climbed down the ladder, feeling awkward in her wrinkled clothes. Caleb was at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Morning," he said, not turning around. "There's fresh clothes on the chair. They belong to my sister. Might be a bit big, but they're warmer than that city suit you're wearing." Elara looked at the chair. Flannel shirt, jeans, thick socks. She changed in the small bathroom, the clothes smelling of lavender and cedar. When she came out, Caleb set a plate of eggs and bacon on the table. "Eat. You need the fuel." They ate in silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, though. It was companionable. Elara found herself studying his hands. They were scarred, rough, capable hands. Hands that built things, fixed things, saved things. "I need to check the stock," he said after breakfast, standing up. "Barn's just out back. You can come if you want, or stay here." Elara looked at the empty cabin. The thought of being alone with her thoughts was daunting. "I'll come," she said. She followed him out into the dazzling white world. The air was crisp and clean, tasting of ice and pine needles. The snow came up to her knees, but Caleb had shoveled a path to the barn. Inside, it was warm and smelled of sweet hay. Horses nickered softly as Caleb entered. He moved among them, speaking in low, gentle tones that Elara had not heard him use with her. She watched as he checked a mare's leg, his touch incredibly tender. "She slipped on the ice yesterday," he explained, noticing Elara's gaze. "She's scared. You have to let them know you're safe." He looked at Elara then, his eyes softening. Same with people, I guess. Elara felt a flush rise in her cheeks. She stepped forward, tentatively reaching out to stroke the mare's velvet nose. The horse huffed warm air onto her hand. "You have a gentle touch," Caleb observed quietly. "Most city folks are too jerky, too much rushing." Elara paused. "I'm always rushing," she admitted. "I don't know how to stop." "You stop by realizing the world doesn't stop turning just because you sit down," Caleb said. He handed her a brush. "Here, brush her down. It's good for the soul." And it was. The repetitive motion, the sound of the bristles on the coat, the warmth of the animal. It was meditative. For the first time, Elara's mind went quiet. Over the next 2 days, a rhythm developed. They cooked together, Elara chopping vegetables with precise architect's lines, Caleb searing meat with instinct. They sat by the fire in the evenings. She told him about the skyscrapers she designed, the desire to reach the clouds. He listened, really listened, watching her face in the firelight. He told her about the ranch, about the grandfather who built the cabin, about the struggle to keep the land in a world that wanted to turn it into condos. "It's not just dirt," he said, staring into the flames. It's history. It's blood. When you lose the land, you lose yourself. Lara looked at him, seeing the deep loneliness he carried. He was a man who had built walls around his heart just as high as the mountains around his valley. But in the warmth of the cabin, those walls were starting to crack. On the third night, they were sitting on the rug, playing a game of cards by lantern light. Their hands brushed as he dealt the deck. The contact was electric. Caleb froze, his eyes locking onto hers. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thin. Lara held her breath. He reached out, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You don't belong here, Elara," he whispered, his voice full of regret. "You're glass and steel. I'm just wood and stone." "Maybe glass needs stone to keep it grounded," she whispered back, leaning into his touch. He leaned in, and for a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The longing was palpable, a physical ache in the room, but then a sound shattered the moment. The distant mechanical rumble of a snowplow engine. Caleb pulled back, his mask of stoicism slamming back into place. He stood up and walked to the window. "Road crew," he said, his voice flat. "They're clearing the pass. You'll be able to leave tomorrow." Elara felt a sharp pang of disappointment, a hollowness in her chest. The bubble had burst. The real world had found them. The next morning, the sun was bright and harsh. Caleb drove her back to her car, which the tow truck had already pulled onto the cleared road. The silence in the truck was heavy, filled with things unsaid. When they arrived, the rental agent was there with a replacement vehicle. It was time to switch back to her life. Elara stood by the driver's door, clutching her coat. Caleb stayed by his truck, his hat pulled low. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight, "for saving me." Caleb nodded, looking at the horizon. "Drive safe, Elara. Don't take any more shortcuts." He didn't say goodbye, just got in his truck and drove away. Elara watched him go until his truck was a speck against the white mountains. Then she got into the car, turned on her phone, and let the flood of notifications drown out the silence. She went back to Chicago. She nailed the presentation. She got the promotion. She was standing in her corner office looking out at the city she loved, but it looked different now. The steel and glass felt cold. The noise of the traffic was abrasive. She found herself waking up at dawn, listening for the silence that wasn't there. She missed the smell of wood smoke. She missed the ache in her muscles from stacking hay. She missed the gray eyes that saw right through her defenses. Weeks turned into months. Spring arrived, turning the city gray slush into rain. Elara sat at her drafting table, supposed to be designing a new corporate headquarters. Instead, her charcoal was sketching a cabin. A low, sturdy structure with a stone chimney. She looked at the drawing, and the realization hit her like a thunderclap. She wasn't building a life here. She was just maintaining a schedule. She looked at her calendar, the tyrant that ruled her. Then, with a shaking hand, she picked up the phone and dialed her boss. "I quit," she said. It was the most reckless, terrifying, and structural sound thing she had ever done. 2 days later, she was in a rental truck, driving west. Not a sedan this time, but a 4x4. She watched the landscape change from cornfields to plains to the rising jagged teeth of the Rockies. Her heart beat faster with every mile. She didn't call ahead. She was afraid he would tell her not to come. She turned onto the dirt road leading to the Thorn Ranch. The snow was gone, replaced by vibrant green grass and wildflowers. It looked completely different, yet exactly the same. She parked near the barn and stepped out. The air was sweet with sage and earth. She heard the sound of a hammer striking wood. She walked around the side of the barn. Caleb was there, repairing a fence. He was shirtless in the spring sun, his back glistening with sweat. He stopped hammering, sensing a presence. He turned slowly, the tool hanging loosely in his hand. When he saw her, he went completely still. Elara stood there, wearing jeans and boots, her hair windblown. "I took a shortcut," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I think this time I'm on the right road." Caleb didn't speak. He dropped the hammer. He walked toward her, slowly at first, and then with long, desperate strides. He stopped inches from her, searching her face as if looking for a trick. "You came back," he rasped. "Why?" "The city. ... your job." "I can build buildings anywhere," Elara said, tears prickling her eyes. "But I can't build a home without the foundation." "You're the foundation, Caleb." He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. This time he didn't hold back, kissed her, and it tasted like sunlight and promise. It tasted like coming home. "I thought I imagined you," he murmured against her hair. "I thought you were a ghost the storm brought in." "I'm real," she promised, holding him tight. "And I'm staying." They stood there for a long time, the wind rushing through the grass around them. It wasn't silent, the birds were singing, the creek was rushing, the horses were grazing. But inside Elara, the noise had finally stopped. Epilogue. A year later, the cabin had changed. There was a new wing added, designed with modern glass that let the mountains inside, seamlessly blended with the old logs. It was the perfect marriage of old and new. On the porch, Elara sat with a blueprint on her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. She was watching Caleb teach a foal to lead in the paddock. He looked up, catching her eye, and tipped his hat. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face. She had traded the skyline for the timberline, and she knew with the certainty of stone that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The architect had finally built her masterpiece, a life she didn't need to escape from.